all of it, but my special part of it, I can tell you, was the last leg that we went on. I was on it.
For nearly 4 decades, Robert Ballard has been known as the man who found the Titanic. His name is etched into history, his discovery hailed as one of the greatest scientific triumphs of the 20th century. But what if the story we've been told is not the whole truth? What if Ballard, now 83 years old, has finally admitted that what he found at the wreck was far more disturbing, far more unsettling than anyone ever dared to imagine? In 1985, the world saw grainy black and white images of Titanic's bow resting in silence on the ocean floor. We saw porcelain dishes scattered like confetti, chandeliers twisted into unnatural shapes, and the once proud ship lying broken in two. But what the world did not see was the evidence Ballard kept to himself, the discoveries he chose to hide, and the memories that have haunted him ever since. After decades of silence, Ballard has finally begun to confess the truth. And what he says may change everything we thought we knew about the Titanic's final resting place. Long before Robert Ballard etched his name into history with the discovery of the Titanic, he was simply a boy growing up in Wichita, Kansas, with a fascination for the unknown. Born in 1942, Ballard's imagination was fueled not by ships at sea, but by outer space. He dreamed of being an astronaut, of charting the stars. But when his family later moved to San Diego, his gaze shifted from the skies above to the mysterious depths of the ocean. The Pacific called to him in a way the heavens never could. For Ballard, the ocean was just as unexplored, just as alien as any distant planet, and far more accessible to a boy determined to make his mark. By the time he was a young man, Ballard's obsession had turned into a career. He studied geology and chemistry, then went on to earn advanced degrees in marine geology and geophysics. His academic path alone could have secured him a life of quiet research. But Ballard was not built for the confines of a laboratory. He wanted adventure, he wanted danger, and he wanted to push machines and himself further than anyone else ever had. This drive led him into the U.S. Navy, where he served as both an officer and a scientist. It was during this period that Ballard was introduced to the cutting-edge world of deep-sea submersibles, vehicles capable of plunging miles below the ocean surface into regions of pressure so crushing they could snap a human body like glass. The Navy recognized something in Ballard beyond his intelligence, his courage. He wasn't just another academic, he was a risk-taker, willing to go where others would hesitate. This combination made him a valuable asset. Throughout the 1970s, Ballard worked on top-secret missions, helping the U.S. military track, recover, and study lost submarines. He learned how to sweep vast areas of ocean with sonar, how to read the faintest signals on a screen, and how to navigate the politics of military secrecy. These were not just missions. They were lessons that would one day give him the exact skill set required to locate the Titanic. But it wasn't only his Navy work that defined him. Ballard also became a pioneer in ocean exploration for the scientific community. He helped develop unmanned submersibles that could send back video footage from the abyss, allowing humans to see what had previously been beyond reach. He tested, refined, and obsessed over technology that many dismissed as too futuristic, too expensive, too risky. Yet Ballard never wavered. He believed the ocean's greatest secrets could only be unlocked by blending human daring with mechanical innovation. By the early 1980s, Ballard had built a reputation as one of the world's foremost deep-sea explorers. But his ambitions extended beyond science. There was one shipwreck, the most famous in the world, that haunted him more than any other, the Titanic. For decades, the great liner had lain somewhere in the North Atlantic, its precise location unknown, its secrets swallowed by the sea. Many had tried and failed to find it. Ballard, however, had both the tools and the daring to succeed. Yet, in a twist few knew at the time, his Titanic mission would be born not of scientific curiosity alone, but out of a covert Cold War deal with the U.S. Navy. The man who would discover Titanic was not simply a scientist. He was a Navy officer, a dreamer turned adventurer, and, most of all, a man carrying both the discipline of military secrets and the passion of exploration. It was this unlikely combination that would lead Robert Ballard to the wreck, and to the haunting discovery he is only now admitting, nearly 40 years later. By the early 1980s, Robert Ballard's reputation as a daring ocean explorer had already set him apart. But what the world didn't know was that the search for Titanic was never meant to be a straightforward scientific mission. Behind the scenes, Ballard had struck a deal with the U.S. Navy, one born out of the tensions of the Cold War. The Navy had lost 2 nuclear submarines, the USS Thresher and the USS Scorpion, in the depths of the Atlantic, and they wanted to know exactly what happened to them. Ballard had been developing a revolutionary robotic submersible called Argo, capable of sweeping the ocean floor with cameras while transmitting real-time images back to the surface. It was the perfect tool for the job, and the Navy approached him with an offer. If he used Argo to locate and inspect their lost submarines, they would allow him to use the remaining time on his expedition to look for the Titanic. What the public would eventually see as a historic discovery was, in reality, the cover story for a top-secret military mission. Ballard agreed, and in 1985, he and his team set out into the North Atlantic under the guise of pursuing Titanic. But their real first targets were the wrecks of the lost subs. Hours of painstaking sweeps across the seabed revealed twisted metal, broken hulls, and evidence that the submarines had imploded under immense pressure. Ballard delivered the answers the Navy had sought, completing his classified mission. But with precious days left on the clock, he finally turned Argo toward the quest that had haunted him for years, the Titanic. For decades, countless expeditions had failed. Some relied on crude sonar sweeps, others on vague survivor accounts. But the Atlantic was vast, and Titanic's grave remained hidden. Ballard, however, had a new strategy. Studying survivor testimonies and naval records, he realized the ship hadn't sunk in one piece. It had broken apart. That meant the wreck would leave a debris trail, a path of scattered items leading to the ship itself. Instead of searching for the Titanic directly, Ballard decided to hunt for this trail. It was a bold, almost desperate gamble, but it was the kind of insight only someone with his Navy background and technological expertise could make. Day after day, Argo descended into the darkness, its cameras beaming back eerie images of the lifeless seabed. The pressure, 2.5 miles down, was equivalent to the weight of several Eiffel Towers pressing on every square inch. In that silent blackness, the crew strained to catch even a glimpse of something out of place, an object that didn't belong to the natural world. Hours turned into days, hope rising and falling with each shift, until finally, small pieces began to appear. Bits of metal, a porcelain plate, scattered fragments half buried in silt. The debris trail had been found, and for the first time in history, humanity was closing in on the Titanic. Every eye aboard the research vessel locked on the monitors, the tension so thick it was suffocating. No one knew what awaited them at the end of the trail. But Ballard understood one thing with absolute certainty. They were on the verge of uncovering not just a shipwreck, but a frozen moment in time, a graveyard preserved under crushing darkness since 1912. What he did not reveal then, and only admits now, at 83, is that he was unprepared for what the trail would truly lead them to. For the Titanic would not just emerge as a wreck of steel and rivets, but as a silent monument of human tragedy, its secrets darker than the ocean that swallowed it. It was September 1st, 1985, when Robert Ballard's long pursuit finally reached its climax. The debris trail that had begun with fragments of metal and a porcelain plate grew denser, thicker, as though the ocean itself was pointing toward something monumental. The tension on the ship was unbearable, each new image from Argo's camera pulling them further into the unknown. Then, out of the endless blackness, a massive shape emerged. At first it was only a shadow, an outline barely discernible against the seabed. But as the camera panned closer, the unmistakable form of a giant boiler came into view. The room fell silent. Titanic had been found. After 73 years of speculation, of legends and failed expeditions, humanity's most famous lost ship had revealed itself. But this was only the beginning. The debris stretched further, guiding them toward something larger. As Argo crept forward, the team gasped as Titanic's bow came into focus. There it was, rising from the abyss, its railings still intact, its anchor chains draped like necklaces of rust. The ship's hull stood as a steel tomb, its sheer size dwarfing everything around it. The cameras traced along its length, revealing the scars of its violent descent. The ocean floor had become a graveyard, and Titanic lay broken but not defeated, a ghostly giant resting in silence. The world would eventually see these haunting images of a ship frozen in time, of windows staring blankly into nothingness. But what the cameras first captured that night was far more than just steel and rivets. Ballard later admitted that in that moment, the triumph of discovery was swallowed by something else, a sense of grief so heavy it was suffocating. The ship was not just a wreck, it was a memorial, a reminder of more than 1,500 lives lost in terror and cold. He recalled how the floodlights illuminated the deck, where families once walked, where music once played, and how eerie it was to see it all draped in silence. As the cameras drifted, objects appeared scattered across the seabed. Shoes still paired together, personal items lying untouched, evidence of humanity reduced to relics of tragedy. The discovery was breathtaking, but it was also horrifying. They had found not just a ship, but the aftermath of one of history's darkest nights. Ballard's team erupted in celebration, but he himself felt a weight he couldn't shake. He knew the world would want to see Titanic, but he also knew there were parts of the wreck that could never be shown. Things too sacred, too disturbing to broadcast. At that moment, he made a vow. Titanic would remain not just a scientific find, but a grave site deserving of reverence. Yet even as the cameras pulled away, Ballard realized something else. The ship was deteriorating. Rust-eating bacteria gnawed at the steel, turning the wreck into a fragile monument destined to crumble in time. What they had captured was fleeting, a last chance to witness Titanic before the sea claimed it entirely. For the world, the moment of discovery was one of wonder and awe. For Ballard, it was a collision of triumph and sorrow, a realization that he had uncovered both the greatest shipwreck in history and a tomb that still whispered of its passengers' final, desperate moments. And though he would share parts of what they found, other things he would keep hidden, locked away, until he was ready to admit the full truth. When Robert Ballard returned from the North Atlantic with footage of Titanic's wreck, the world erupted in fascination. Newspapers splashed headlines across their front pages, television networks broadcast the haunting images, and millions of people were stunned to see the legendary ship with their own eyes for the very first time. What the public was shown in 1985 was carefully chosen. The sweeping bow rising from the seabed like a steel cathedral, the anchor chains that still clung to their posts, the portholes that looked like lifeless eyes staring out of the abyss. Viewers saw the grand staircase reduced to fragments, chandeliers twisted by pressure, and china plates scattered like confetti across the ocean floor. The images were eerie, almost poetic, a storybook tragedy finally given form. It was a moment that reignited Titanic fever across the globe. Books were written, documentaries aired, and the ship re-entered popular culture as a symbol of both engineering triumph and human fragility. For the world, Ballard's discovery was a treasure, a link between history and the present. Yet what the cameras broadcast was only a fraction of what had truly been seen. Ballard was deliberate in his choices. He wanted to give the public enough to marvel at, enough to feel the magnitude of the discovery, but he also wanted to protect the wreck's dignity. He showed the ship's grandeur, its haunting beauty beneath the waves, but he did not show the more unsettling details. For example, he revealed the broken stern lying mangled across the seabed, evidence of the ship's violent final moments. He revealed the massive gash in the hull, confirming theories of how water had rushed in after the iceberg strike. But what he kept hidden were the smaller, more personal discoveries. Objects that told stories of passengers in their last, desperate minutes. To the public, Titanic was a ghost ship, mysterious and majestic. But to Ballard, it was something far more human. He remembered vividly seeing rows of shoes still aligned in pairs, lying in the sand where their owners had once stood. He recalled objects scattered with a precision that suggested final acts of panic. Watches, jewelry, spectacles, all frozen in time. These details, though haunting, were kept from the public eye, and instead, the narrative was one of scientific achievement and historical awe. By controlling the images released, Ballard ensured Titanic would be viewed as a symbol rather than a crime scene. It became the story of a ship rediscovered, not the raw truth of a mass grave lying in eternal darkness. The world was captivated by what it was shown, yet it never realized how much more there was, how much had been left hidden beneath the weight of secrecy and respect. Ballard himself later admitted that what was shared was only the surface of the truth. What was not revealed would haunt him for decades and would eventually form the core of the confession he makes now at 83. For all the images and footage that stunned the world in 1985, there were details Robert Ballard and his team deliberately chose not to release. Behind the curtain of public triumph, there existed another version of Titanic's discovery, one darker, more intimate, and far more disturbing. Ballard admitted years later that when Argo's cameras swept across the ocean floor, they found more than twisted steel and scattered porcelain. They found traces of the lives that had been lost. Shoes lying side by side, as though their owners had once stood there waiting, were perhaps the most chilling evidence. Clothing remnants appeared in the sand, fabric preserved in the cold depths of the Atlantic. Suitcases were discovered, some burst open, their contents spilled across the seabed like the belongings of people who never reached their destination. These details were left out of the public eye, not because they weren't significant, but because they were too human, too painful to present to a curious world eager for spectacle. Ballard feared that showing these discoveries would turn Titanic into a macabre exhibit, a place where human tragedy was exploited for entertainment. He knew that once these images were made public, the wreck would be seen less as a historical site and more as a graveyard to be plundered. For Ballard, the most sacred rule of his discovery was respect. The Titanic was not just another shipwreck. It was a mass grave, the final resting place of more than 1,500 souls. And in the silence of the deep, their presence was unmistakable. One of the most haunting discoveries that Ballard withheld was evidence of how violently the ship had torn apart as it sank. The stern, mangled and twisted like a crushed toy, revealed a catastrophic implosion that no drawing or eyewitness account had ever fully conveyed. The violence of Titanic's final moments was imprinted into its steel, and Ballard admitted that it was disturbing even to look at. He knew the world would not be ready for such an image of destruction, and so he kept it quiet. Then there were the personal items. Watches still clasped, wedding rings lying in the silt, spectacles that had once framed someone's last view of life above the waves. These artifacts were not shown in 1985, nor were they ever meant to be, because to Ballard, they were not simply objects. They were pieces of human lives stolen in an instant. He revealed years later that he feared releasing those details would lead to a rush of treasure hunters descending on the wreck to strip it of its remaining dignity. Already he knew there would be those who saw Titanic not as a grave, but as an opportunity to profit from relics of tragedy. And he was right. Within years of the discovery, salvage operations began, pulling thousands of artifacts from the wreck and displaying them in exhibitions around the world. To Ballard, It was a violation of the sanctity of the site. It was exactly what he had tried to prevent by keeping his most disturbing finds hidden. What the public saw in 1985 was awe-inspiring, but what was hidden from them was heartbreaking. Fragments of human life scattered across the seabed, evidence that Titanic was not only a shipwreck, but a frozen moment of horror. Ballard carried those images with him silently for decades, never fully able to share the truth, until now, when at 83, he finally admits just how much he chose to conceal. As the years passed, whispers and rumors surrounded Robert Ballard's 1985 discovery, but the man himself remained cautious, careful never to reveal everything he and his team had truly seen. Only now, at 83, has Ballard begun to admit the depth of the buried truth about Titanic's wreck, and what he says shatters many long-held assumptions. When Argo's cameras drifted along the ocean floor, they revealed chilling evidence that Titanic's end had been even more violent than historians believed. The stern section, far from simply breaking away, appeared mangled beyond recognition, torn and twisted by unimaginable forces as it plunged toward the seabed. Massive pieces of steel lay folded in on themselves like paper, and Ballard realized the ship's final plunge had been more chaotic, more catastrophic than any survivor account could describe. But beyond the ship's mangled bones lay something even more disturbing. Ballard has quietly admitted that in the debris field, he encountered what he cautiously described as evidence of human presence. To him, the shoes lying side by side were not just objects. They were grave markers, silent witnesses to the lives that ended in those dark waters. The arrangement of personal items suggested moments frozen in time. A pair of boots, still aligned, as though someone had once been standing in them. A suitcase burst open with clothing still spilling out. A pocket watch lying face up in the silt, its hands forever stopped. These discoveries told a story of panic, of loss, of humanity swallowed whole. Ballard revealed that he and his crew discussed whether they were seeing more than objects, whether some of what lay before them might once have been human remains, reduced by the sea, but leaving ghostly imprints on the ocean floor. The extreme depths, the freezing temperatures, and the lack of oxygen had created conditions where traces could persist far longer than many assumed. Ballard never confirmed this publicly, fearing the world's reaction, but in later years he acknowledged that the line between artifacts and remains blurred disturbingly during their exploration. The most haunting revelation came when he described how the wreck itself bore scars not just of sinking, but of human desperation. Handrails bent and twisted told silent stories of people clinging for life. Objects clumped together suggested groups who had gone down side by side. To Ballard, Titanic was not just a shipwreck. It was a cemetery. And yet, despite the temptation to reveal all, he chose silence. He knew that broadcasting the full truth would unleash a frenzy of grave robbers, salvage companies, and opportunists eager to strip Titanic of its sanctity. Already he had watched with frustration as expeditions began tearing artifacts from the wreck, displaying them in exhibitions, and selling pieces of Titanic's soul to the highest bidder. What he kept hidden was his attempt to preserve dignity, to shield Titanic from the greed of the living. But now, decades later, he admits the truth plainly. The wreck is more than steel and rivets, more than history and tragedy. It is the final resting place of human souls, a frozen moment in time that cannot be fully understood without acknowledging what still lies in its shadows. At 83, Ballard confesses what he once concealed, that Titanic's wreck is not just a discovery, but a haunting reminder of life cut short, of human traces still echoing in the silence of the abyss. For nearly 40 years, Robert Ballard carried the weight of what he saw in silence. When asked why he never revealed the full truth, why he chose to keep certain images and discoveries from the world, his answer was not about secrecy for its own sake, but about morality, dignity, and respect. In his words, Titanic was not just a wreck to be studied. It was a grave site, and grave sites are sacred. Ballard knew the moment he shared everything he had found, the moment he revealed the haunting evidence of lives frozen in time, the wreck would be transformed from a solemn monument into a circus for scavengers. Already, within years of the discovery, salvagers began descending on Titanic, hauling up thousands of artifacts, jewelry, plates, clothing, even pieces of the ship itself. Exhibitions sprouted around the world, selling tickets to curious crowds eager to stand in front of fragments of tragedy. To Ballard, it felt like desecration, a betrayal of the very people Titanic had claimed. This was exactly what he had tried to prevent, and it was why he remained silent for so long. He often said that Titanic should be left alone, untouched, preserved in the depths where she lay. But Ballard also knew the world was not ready to hear what he had really seen. Imagine telling the public in 1985 that shoes, suitcases, and personal belongings still marked the seabed like silent tombstones. Imagine admitting that the debris field contained traces so human, so intimate, that it was impossible not to feel the presence of the dead. In the mid-1980s, when Titanic fever swept across the globe, such an admission might have caused a frenzy. Tourist expeditions, grave robbing, endless violations of the wreck's sanctity. Ballard chose to shield that truth because he believed it was the only way to protect Titanic from exploitation. His silence, however, was not easy. He has spoken of the nightmares, the images he could not erase, the memories of seeing belongings scattered like ghosts on the ocean floor. Every time he looked back at the footage, he was reminded not of his triumph, but of the immense human loss. Ballard feared that by speaking, he would reduce Titanic to spectacle, that people would forget the real tragedy and turn it into a showpiece for greed. For decades, he watched as others took control of the narrative. Books, films, documentaries, even James Cameron's blockbuster movie, each presenting their own version of the ship's fate. Yet none of them, he felt, conveyed the true, raw, horrifying silence of what he had seen in 1985. He kept his vow, even as people questioned him, even as critics accused him of hiding the truth. Only now, with age and perspective, has he begun to open up about why he concealed so much. At 83, Ballard admits that his silence was never about deception. It was about protection. It was about ensuring that Titanic remained not a treasure chest, but a memorial. It was about respecting the dignity of more than 1,500 souls who never returned from that night in 1912. And though he knows some will say he robbed history by keeping so much hidden, he insists that sometimes silence is the only way to preserve the truth. Today, at 83 years old, Robert Ballard speaks with a weight in his voice that only time can give, a weight born from decades of carrying secrets he once thought too heavy for the world to bear. His admission about what he truly found at Titanic's wreck is not just a revelation, it is a reminder, a warning, and a legacy. For so long, the public knew only the images of grandeur, the iconic bow, the chandeliers twisted by pressure, the scattered porcelain plates gleaming like fallen stars on the seabed. But now, with Ballard's confession, we understand that what lay hidden was even more haunting. The shoes lined in pairs, the suitcases burst open with clothes still intact, the watches and rings, the fragments of lives never lived. These were not relics of history, but echoes of humanity. They were the silent voices of the 1,500 souls who went down into the freezing night of April 15, 1912. Their memories etched forever into the Atlantic's dark floor. By admitting this now, Ballard reshapes the way Titanic is remembered. It is no longer just a lost ship rediscovered by science. It is no longer just an artifact of maritime engineering or a tragic footnote in history. It is a tomb, a solemn reminder of mortality, of how quickly triumph can collapse into tragedy, of how fragile human life truly is. And perhaps that is why Ballard stayed silent for so long, because the wreck is not ours to consume, not ours to strip apart for exhibitions, but ours to respect as sacred ground. His admission also forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth about exploration itself. In our pursuit of discovery, we often forget the human cost. The Titanic, for all its fame, was not just an engineering marvel. It was filled with fathers, mothers, children, and dreamers, all of whom shared the same belief that they were safe on the unsinkable ship. Ballard's discovery gave the world images to marvel at, but his silence protected their dignity. Now, as he looks back, he acknowledges that his choice may have been controversial, but he believes it was right. He wanted Titanic to be remembered not as a treasure trove, but as a memorial, and that legacy is perhaps his greatest gift. The reminder that some places, no matter how fascinating, must remain untouched. The legacy of his admission also extends beyond Titanic itself. Ballard has spent a lifetime exploring the deep, discovering hydrothermal vents, sunken warships, and forgotten ruins beneath the waves. Yet none of those finds compare to Titanic, because none carry the same weight of human loss. His words now, after decades of silence, serve as a call to future generations of explorers to explore with reverence, to seek knowledge, but never at the cost of respect. And for the millions of people who still feel drawn to Titanic's story, his admission closes a circle. It reminds us that beneath the steel and the rust, beneath the fascination and the myths, Titanic is not simply a shipwreck. It is a mass grave, and it deserves to be honored as such. At 83, Robert Ballard has finally unburdened himself. He has confessed what he found, what he chose to hide, and why he stayed silent for so long. And in doing so, he has given us a truth more powerful than any image or artifact. The knowledge that Titanic still speaks, not in words, but in silence, in shoes scattered on the seabed, in suitcases lying in the sand, in the haunting presence that lingers 2.5 miles beneath the ocean. That is the legacy of Robert Ballard's admission. That is the truth of Titanic's final resting place. And that is why, even now, long after the cameras have stopped rolling, the wreck continues to whisper to us across time, reminding us of both the fragility of human ambition and the unbreakable dignity of those who never returned from that fateful night.